oneBURGH and the TroupCast are partnering with the Ryan Shazier Fund for Spinal Rehabilitation. The Run for the Black and Gold will take place on Friday evening, May 2nd at AccuShore Stadium in the PNC Champions Club. We will be on site at the event that night from AccuShore Stadium with the red carpet, player interviews, and more. Horse race and celebrity jockey auction will feature Ryan Shazier, Jerome Bettis, Mel Blunt, Pat Fryermuth, Arthur Moats, and more. For tickets and more information, visit www.ryanshazierfund.org/run25 and join us next week for a special edition of the TroupCast with a press conference-like podcast with three of the celebrity jockeys next week right here on oneBURGH. Welcome to the TroupCast for Thursday, April 10th. I am your host, Ed Troup, and joining me back into our podcast this week is our good friend, Del Lolley from Steelers.com and the Steelers Audio Network. Del, great to have you back. It is springtime. The draft is right around the corner, and we're still talking football.
Yeah, everything's starting to speed up again now after a few weeks of slow things. After things kind of settled down, in the aftermath of free agency, now things will start to pick up again, and we'll have the draft here in a couple of weeks, and the Steelers will start their OTAs and all that stuff, and next thing you know, the season's here.
Dale, one of the big stories this morning here on Thursday, and again, we're recording this here in the morning on April 10th. I always like to put that disclaimer in because we usually air this in the evening, and there's so many moving parts, and news can change so quickly. But as of right now, the big story with the Steelers is they're having a visit today by Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders, Deion Sanders' son, coming into the Steeler facilities today to meet with the Steelers to make an official visit. A lot of draft experts have him as the number 2 quarterback in this list, but if he could possibly fall to number 21 to the Steelers, do you possibly think that Sanders could be a fit and the Steelers might be serious about this? Because up to this point, it seemed like a little bit of a dream or maybe a very unlikely scenario, but it's getting a little bit more real with him making a visit today.
Yeah, and as we tape this, I haven't gotten any confirmation he's actually made it into town, and that's one of the things that people need to remember with these visits. Um, there are scheduled visits, and I never report anything on the visits until they actually take place because I can tell you, their first day they were supposed to have visitors here this year. They were supposed to have 4 guys in, and only 3 made it because of they had some plane problems, as we all know happen. And so that guy didn't make it in. I don't know if he was rescheduled. I wasn't told exactly who it was, but at that time he couldn't make it in. But if Sanders did make it in, it's just a continuation of them doing their due diligence on all the quarterbacks in this draft class. Not named Cam Ward. They're not going to have a chance at Cam Ward. But you want to sit down. You want to learn as much about these guys as you can, and not just because maybe you're thinking about drafting them this year, but you're going to play against these guys, at some point as well. And so you want to pick their brains, put them on the whiteboard, do that kind of stuff, and find out, okay, how well does this guy understand the game? What are his strengths? What are his weaknesses? Maybe he becomes a free agent in 4 or 5 years, and you might be, circle back around and be interested in him again, as we saw with, Justin Fields last year. So you do your due diligence on these guys. For me, I like Sanders, but I don't know that his upside potential is exactly what I'd be looking for if I'm going to take a swing at the quarterback position. I really think that the Steelers have loaded up to go after the quarterback next year, with the compensatory picks that they've acquired or will acquire, through this free agency cycle. As things currently stand, it looks like they're going to get an extra 3, an extra 4, an extra 5, and an extra 6. And those could even improve, based on play time and things of that nature. So, maybe they go into next year's draft with 3 third-round picks, for example. Well, now you've got some ammunition to, potentially make a big move up to go get a quarterback if you've identified somebody that you like there. At the same time, if they have the 21st pick in the draft, and they're not going to move up this year. So, if one of those guys happens to fall to them and they feel like he could be the long-term answer, you take him. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. I don't think Sanders makes it to 21. I think somebody will make a move to go get him. Uh, I've seen Jackson Dart's name thrown around a lot with the 21st pick. He's not worth the 21st pick in this draft. He just isn't. Um, you know, that would be a reach, and I just don't see the Steelers reaching this year. So, most of the guys that they've spoken to, you're looking at, potentially being that third round draft pick. They could move up in the, into the second round or something like that if somebody fell that they really really liked, because they do have those picks next year that they could, package and try to do something with. Even though you don't own those ones yet, you could still move your third and your four next year, knowing that you're going to get a three and a four in compensatory picks. But I think they're probably going to be willing to, wait and see. They're going to have another young quarterback. I'm assuming Aaron Rodgers at some point is going to sign with the Steelers. They're going to take four quarterbacks to training camp because they do every year, and it's never bad business to take a quarterback in the draft because, as we see this year, the two guys that they had last year were both guys that people, other teams wanted. So those quarterbacks are always valuable, and you might as well grab one.
Dell, I was gonna wait to bring up Aaron Rodgers, but you just brought him up, so we'll go ahead and we'll just jump right into the Aaron Rodgers conversation. We had Merrill Hodge on with us last week, and we are talking about Aaron Rodgers being a good fit for the Steelers, basically because of his veteran leadership, his proven record, and what he could possibly do here for the next year or so, until they find that next answer at quarterback. And what's your thinking of why Rodgers has not signed up to this point? It seems as though the Steelers have offered him. All that's in place. It doesn't seem to be a money issue from what we hear. It just seems to be more of a timing issue when Rodgers will officially sign and report to the Steelers facilities, if he does, if he chooses to do so.
Yeah, I think when we were at the league meetings last week, and Art Rooney II said that he all signs are pointing towards that happening. Um, Art doesn't say that unless he thinks it's going to happen. I mean, he is a trained lawyer. He chooses his words very particularly. So I expect it to happen. They expect it to happen. I don't know what the timetable is on this. I don't know what is holding this up, whether they have a handshake agreement or, something there. But they had a meeting with him a couple of Fridays ago when he came into Pittsburgh. To me, if I can't imagine Aaron Rodgers, who's living in California, hopping on a plane, spending 5 hours on a plane to then spend an entire day in Pittsburgh and then fly back to California if he wasn't really serious about playing football this year. Now the holdup. There's really no timetable on this thing. They're not practicing right now. They're not doing anything other than preparing for the draft. As Art said and Mike Tomlin said, they're not putting any fine. There's no deadline on when they need to know, but they will need to know at some point. But I feel like they have a pretty good idea of where he is leaning. Mike Tomlin said he's been in constant contact with Aaron Rodgers, and I think if they felt like he wasn't going to sign, um, there would be some kind of announcement or something along those lines. Rodgers would, announce his retirement or whatever he's going to do, or there would be some kind of finality to this whole thing. The fact that there hasn't been that, I just think that's part of the process with Aaron Rodgers, and that's my only trepidation about the whole situation. Aaron Rodgers, the player. Um, I saw enough, last year after he kind of regained his footing, coming back off of the Achilles injury, that he could still play at a reasonably high level.
Right.
Um, but I don't want to deal with all the other stuff. And by the other stuff, I mean he can't be skipping mini camp to go to Egypt. Um, he can't, you're not going to allow him to bring in his own handpicked guys. Like either you're part of this team or you're not part of this team. And if you're part of this team, you got to be on board with what we got and how we're going to do things here. Um, that was the one thing that Russell Wilson did last year when he was coming in. I know there was a lot of people say, well, Cam Hayward recruited him and TJ Watt recruited him. It was the other way around. Um, it was Russell Wilson who made the call to Cam Hayward. It was Russell Wilson who called TJ Watt. He called Minka Fitzpatrick and basically said, "Hey, I want to be a part of this. I want to, I want to help you guys win, and I'm not coming in here to take over the locker room or be this guy or be that guy. I just want to be a part of this team." And that's what those conversations were about. So, it wasn't any of those guys recruiting him. It was him recruiting them to say, "Hey, I want to be a part of this." So if Aaron Rodgers wants to do that and be a part of this and do this kind of the way that Russell Wilson did, great. I'm on board with it. I think he is an upgrade. He's one of the best quarterbacks of all time. We'll see what he has left in the tank, but I think if I'm Aaron Rodgers, I don't want to go out like I did last season. 5-12, it just wasn't a really good season with the Jets.
Right.
I think he would understand coming to Pittsburgh. There is a higher level of winning here consistently, and I know they haven't won a playoff game. We all know that, but they win, and it's one of the things that drives me crazy when people start comparing the Pirates to there's the
Uh,
Steelers to the Pirates, or what's happening to the Penguins right now what's going on with the Steelers. It's not close. Penguins haven't made the playoffs in each of the last 3 years in a league where pretty much everybody makes the playoffs, and it's not like they haven't been trying to make the playoffs. They just haven't made it. The Pirates have had what, 3 winning seasons in the last 30 years.
Correct.
I've covered the Steelers for 33 years. They've had 3 losing seasons in those 33 years. Like it's completely different. There's a plan in place, and they've acquired all those compensatory picks for next year because I really think next year is the year that they go and try to get their franchise quarterback. But in the meanwhile, you got to still try to win games. That's the name of the game. If you don't win, it's all moot. People get fired. So you still try to win and you try to compete, and that's what you should try to do. This idea that they should tank or try to get better draft picks, that's ridiculous. You try to win as many games as you can, and if you're not, what are you doing? You're out there to try to win games, and Aaron Rodgers gives you a chance to do that.
I completely agree, Dell. And it's the argument that I make year after year after year, where everybody says, "Well, they make the playoffs, no playoff wins." We all want playoff wins. We want to see
Sure,
this team succeed.
absolutely.
We want to that narrative never changes. But would you rather the franchise win a Super Bowl and then go 10 straight years like some NFL franchises do and not be competitive? Their season is over by Thanksgiving or before Thanksgiving, and then you're watching football in December that's meaningless, or do you hang on tight and it's a thrilling end of the season rush and they make the playoffs and hopefully one of these years starts to win a playoff game again? I would rather take that than win a Super Bowl and have 10 years of meaningless football. And that is not what we've experienced here in Pittsburgh. We are talking with Dell Lolley, the from Steelers.com and the Steelers Audio Network. You can catch Dell and Matt Williamson, among others, on the Steelers Audio Network. Dell, you're still doing your draft shows probably this time of the year with Matt, right?
Oh, yeah, 5 days a week. We're just rolling right along. It's I'm really anxious for this draft to get here. We've been talking about it since January. I've learned a lot about this particular draft group. It's not a super talented group at the top, but I do think there's some good depth at some key positions, and I think the Steelers can really help themselves in this draft. You know, it, whether it's taking a quarterback, I think they should, take a defensive lineman in the first round. In my opinion, they're going to acquire a running back at some point in this draft, and it's a really good running back class as well. In addition to the defensive line draft, it's just interesting to see how these go from year to year. In recent years, like the last 5 drafts, have all been really deep in wide receivers. Well, this year's class isn't that, and I think you saw the Steelers make a move, in the DK Metcalf trade. It kind of showed us, that you trade your second round draft pick away for a wide receiver, and you're a team that's had a lot of success drafting wide receivers. Kind of tells me what they think of the wide receiver draft class as well. So we'll see where this whole thing goes. But I think they can add some key pieces even without that second round pick that they traded away for DK Metcalf.
The first round of the NFL draft is 2 weeks from today on April 24th. I'm gonna throw a couple names at you. I agree, Dell. Everything that I've read here in the recent weeks points towards the defensive line. If you don't have somebody like Sanders or somebody else that follows the number 21, most likely it should be defensive line. But let me throw a couple names at you, get your thoughts. If these are on you and Matt's radar, maybe we should have Matt on sometime with you too. We'll get the whole crew together. We'll make that happen next time around. But Jackson Dart, we talked about the quarterback position, and Will Howard, and again, Jalen Monroe from Alabama has been mentioned a few times too. But again, I'm with you. I think those are two or third, fourth round picks if possible. But when you look at defensive line, Kenneth Grant from Michigan, 6'4", 331 pounds. Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, and Derek Harmon from Oregon as well at 6'5", 310. Those are three defensive linemen that could be there at 21 and could be a good fit for the Steelers, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I like all three of those guys. I actually like them. Everybody's talking about Mason Graham being the
Yeah,
first defensive tackle taken in this draft. And while that may be the case, he doesn't fit the Steelers' defense.
right.
He is an up the field, undersized, 6'3", 296-pound defensive tackle with 32-inch arms. In the Steelers' defense, he would have to play the nose, and I don't think he's a nose. Kenneth Grant is a nose. Who can also potentially kick outside or play some pass rush situations in your nickel and dime. I do think he has that kind of juice. I think if you're looking at the pure defensive end, now you're looking at Harmon with that size and length. He's got the 34 plus inch arms. In addition to being 6'5", got some pass rush juice. Nolan to me is the kind of a wild card. Um, he is talented. For whatever reason, the guys that go to Texas A&M just don't produce numbers, and I don't understand it. I don't know if it's what they're asking them to do in that scheme. They had the number one draft class, and Nolan was a part of that. They had five-star defensive linemen in that recruiting class, including Nolan, who was the number one guy in the country. And none of those guys really produced any big numbers at Texas A&M. But when Nolan transferred to Ole Miss last year, next thing he's going out and getting 6.5 sacks. There's a lot to like there with him. If you turn it on, you see the flashes. He needs to get better with his hand placement and things of that nature. But he could learn those things, and sitting behind Cam Hayward for a year wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for him, and he would still play in some situational pass rushing, do things like that. That's the one spot, if you look at the Steelers roster, that they don't really have a starter right now after releasing Larry Ogunjobi. Everywhere else that you look on their roster, there is an NFL capable guy, a starter capable guy. Even at running back, you got Jalen Warren there. If they had to go into the regular season with Jalen Warren as their starter, they'd be perfectly happy doing that.
Right.
If they had to play Mason Rudolph at quarterback, they would be perfectly happy doing that. Not a defensive tackle right now. And maybe you can kick Keanu Benton out to a defensive end, which I think he's more suited to do anyways, and get yourself a true nose tackle, which those guys are littered throughout this draft. But that's the one spot that they need to really improve their depth and on the defensive line, and start to make plans for when you're not going to have Cam Hayward around anymore, because he's 35 years old. He's not going to play at that level forever.
Yeah, absolutely, Dale. That is a very good point on that when it comes to Cam Hayward and his limited time that he has left in the black and gold. So defensive line, that's pretty much where all the arrows are pointing at this point. Dale, you mentioned DK Metcalf a little bit ago. Of course, the Steelers go out and get him to start right before free agency started. And now he's with George Pickens. That could be a very dangerous wide receiver duo. Whoever's the quarterback throwing the football, maybe Rudolph, maybe Aaron Rodgers, maybe a rookie. We're not sure yet. But whoever's throwing that football, those two could really make some big things happen in that passing game this upcoming season.
Yeah, and just the fact when you put those two on the field together, um, you will not see a safety within 15 yards of the line of scrimmage when those two guys are out there split wide. So, I think it should help the running game tremendously. And those two guys are, I know a lot of people say, well, they have similar skill sets. They really don't. Pickens is a combat catch guy, whereas Metcalf, he's a deep threat, but he's a run by people kind of guy. You don't often see him hand fighting and doing those kind of things with people. He is a monster. The pictures don't do him justice in terms of what he actually looks like in person. And to think that that guy's running in the 4.3s. There's nobody's going to press him in terms of coverage. So he's going to back the corners off. It's going to open a lot of things up in the flats, things over the middle. It really, to me, if you start looking at the guys who change teams in this offseason, in terms of offensive skill players, it's probably the biggest acquisition in the league. Nobody else really changed teams. T. Higgins stayed in Cincinnati. Chris Godwin stayed with Tampa Bay. Metcalf is the one. There weren't any running backs that I think are equal to him in terms of what he actually, does on the field. I know Najee Harris went to the Chargers, but Metcalf to me is the number one offensive skill player acquisition of this offseason.
We're talking with Dell Lolley from the Steelers.com. There I go. I'm back on with Dell. I got some battery issues here, Dell. So we're working through some technical difficulties. Hopefully, we're still online. We still have about 10 minutes with you from the Steelers Audio Network and Steelers.com. Make sure you check out Dell Lolley each and every week. We're just talking about DK Metcalf and George Pickens. Other signings this offseason as well, Dell. Darius Slay at the cornerback position, Kenneth Gainwell at running back, Malik Harrison. They really like him coming in at the linebacker position. Of course, Landon Roberts, the Steelers lose him in free agency on defense. So far, and I know there's still more offseason to come with the draft and leading up to, as you mentioned, OTAs, mini camp, and eventually training camp. But so far, how would you rate this offseason so far for the Steelers with what they have done in free agency, who they lost, and who they gained?
Well, I think this was kind of a reset for them in terms of losing some guys. And again, we mentioned those compensatory picks that they've acquired. I think that was part of the plan going into this offseason. I think that's why some of those guys that they did sign or were guys that had been released by their other, by their former team. Some of those guys that they did sign, Gamewell and Harrison, were guys who were true free agents, but they had lost enough other guys that, it kind of offsets that. Um, so I think that they've, again, the Met, I can't overestimate uh, what Metcalf brings to this offense. I think Slay is going to be a key piece to that defense. We'll see how Harrison fits in. I was a Landon Roberts guy. I think he did a lot of good stuff for the Steelers. At the same time, you know, you're going to ask more from Peyton Wilson this year. So maybe that takes him out of the equation as a special teams player, and he played a lot of special team snaps last year. Roberts isn't going to do that for you, in his 30s. So I understand, trading him out for Malik Harrison, who is a core special teams guy and he can play on the edge, he can play, in the middle. Again, that big hole right now, is still at defensive tackle, and I would have liked to have seen them try to address that, in free agency, and they did have some things that were, potentially lined up, and it didn't work out. And some of those defensive tackles got overpaid, quite frankly. I mean, you're not going to pay those guys more than what you're paying Cam Hayward, and that would have been the case if you had to do that. So that's why I looked at the draft to try to fill that defensive tackle spot. I think Gainwell gives them a different kind of running back than what they have in Jalen Warren. He's more of a shifty, pass catcher. Can also return some kicks. You're not going to want Jalen Warren returning kicks next year if that's the case. If he is the number one guy, so I like what they've done. I think that they're a better football team right now than what they put out there last year. I think Slay is an upgrade over what they had at cornerback. And I just think that you know you look at Brandon Eccles as another guy that can play inside in the slot, can play outside. So I think they've helped themselves there.
Dale, let's shift gears a little bit here and talk a little bit about what the future looks like for the Steelers at the quarterback position. We talked Aaron Rodgers. You mentioned Mason Rudolph. One thing I thought was very intriguing that you were talking about was next year could possibly be the year where they go and get that franchise quarterback, especially with all the different picks that they have, that they're going to be able to put a package maybe together next year and make some trades and make some movement. Talk a little bit about that because, the quarterback room the last few years since Big Ben's retired has switched over pretty much every year. It's been a brand new room the last couple seasons, and it will be once again here in 2025.
Yeah, and you do have some level of stability there since they reacquired Mason Rudolph. I mean, he's a guy that at least has been in the building and knows the players, in that building. So it's not a complete makeover like it was last year. But this is what happens when you don't have the franchise guy. Ideally they would have still had Kenny Pickett, in the building, and that would have worked out. But if things happened. Um, you know, I, I've been around long enough to remember the post Neil O'Donnell stuff with when they
Yeah,
drafted Cordell Stewart, and that '96 training camp when you had a three-way race for the quarterback spot. They decide on Jim Miller in the opener, and at halftime when Greg Lloyd gets hurt, they go to Mike Tomczak, and he starts the rest of the season. The next year, then it's Cordell Stewart. And then he's the starter for 2 years. Next thing you know, you're going to Kent Graham in '99. Like, people forget these things. This is what happens when you don't have a franchise quarterback. You got to figure these things out and try to find that next guy. Hopefully, for them, it doesn't take 20 years like it did between Terry Bradshaw's retirement and Ben Roethlisberger coming in. But you got to keep taking swings at it, and that's what they're doing right now. If they can do that, perhaps next year. I know people talk about that quarterback class next year is going to be so much better than this year's class. Well, we don't know that.
right.
Everybody assumes, for example, that Arch Manning is going to enter the draft next year. He'll be eligible to enter the draft next year. But first of all, with Arch Manning, we're talking about a guy that, our kid really, two career starts. He's played the majority of a third game in his career. So that's what you're looking at right now. So he'll start this year at Texas. We don't know if he's going to be any good or not. We can assume that he might be good. We don't know that he's going to enter the draft next year because he can make a nice chunk of money staying in college now. The
Right.
NIL stuff has changed everything in regards to that. If you look back at the pre-season draft stuff from last year, going into the season, and all the way too early mock drafts, a lot of people had Carson Beck as the number one pick in this year's draft. Carson Beck's not even in this draft, and he's not even at Georgia anymore. He changed schools. So, you don't know what's going to happen. People thought Drew Aller from Penn State was going to come out this year because he was draft eligible. He decided to stay in school because you can make a nice chunk of money staying in school and just being a student. And, if somebody wants to pay you $4 or $5 million to do that, I can't blame a kid if he wants to do that. If I could go back to college, and I would do it too. But so you don't know what's going to be there. You assume, based on what you're looking at with the preseason stuff. Okay, there maybe it will be a little bit deeper next year. But if you don't love a guy in this year's draft, then don't take a guy. Certainly not early, because it's just way too important to just throw a pick at it. You better really be locked in on the guy. And to me, if I'm looking at that, I like Tanner Shuck from Louisville. I know he's a little bit of an older uh, prospect. He'll be 26 in September, but he can make all the throws and do all those kind of things, and he's not going to cost you a first round draft pick. I like Jalen Milrow for his upside. Again, not going to be a first round guy, but I think the ceiling is such that I could see him being a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. Can Shador Sanders be that? I don't think so. I think his ceiling is being a good average starter, and while there's nothing wrong with that, I want to do better than that if I'm going to use a first round draft pick on a quarterback.
And as we know, there's no guarantees for any player that comes out of the draft, but the quarterback position usually there's more misses than hits if you go back through
Oh yeah.
NFL history and yeah, first round quarterback picks. So it's not always a slam dunk. See Kenny Pickett from a few years ago, right? But the Steelers will have some interesting decisions to make. The draft again just 2 weeks from today. Dale, I want to end with this. I know the Steelers are your passion, it's your gig, but I also know you have another passion, and that's baseball. The Pittsburgh Pirates have started the season at 5-8. Got about 5 minutes here left with you. Let's get your thoughts on the start on and off the field. They just took 2 out of 3 against the Cardinals, so that's a little bit of a bright spot. Hopefully, some momentum for the Pirates after that awful start the first couple weeks of the season here. But off the field, a little bit of turbulence as well. The Clemente sign in right field just went back up yesterday at PNC Park. It was taken down for an advertisement. That rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, including the Clemente family. And then the bricks outside of PNC Park is the latest buzz as well. Those were removed that were put in place at the opening of PNC Park. People purchased those bricks. There's a lot of sentimental value with a lot of families in and around the game of baseball that bought those bricks with the Pirates. But your thoughts on and off the field so far? It's been a rough couple weeks for the Pirates.
Yeah, and I get it. I mean, people again, the people want to see the team win. They want to see the team spend money and do this and do that. They're never going to be free spending like some of these other franchises. They just can't. They can't afford it. Um, you know, yes, they could do it, but you're in business to make money, and I understand if you win, more people are going to come to the park, but is it going to be enough to offset that? What you're spending. Um, I, you know, they have to draft well. They have to draft well. They have to develop talent well. They've done that with some of the pitching, and we're going to start to see some of those guys come through here, and as this season comes on and moves on. But they haven't really developed the hitters, and those two things go hand in hand. And if it's me, um, you gotta Brian Reynolds can't be your best hitter. He just can't. He's a good player. He's not a great player, and you know you need some great players in that batting order to make this team better. I don't care how good your pitching is.
Right.
If you don't score runs, you're not going to win. And as for the off the field stuff, people are going to get fired up about whatever the Pirates do off the field, and I don't know enough about the situations with the bricks and all that stuff that they're talking about. Well, they've replaced them before and nobody said anything, but people are going to be looking, because they just you hear the sell the team chants and all that stuff. Uh, you're the owner's the owner. Deal with it. You can either support it or you don't. If you've gone to the ballpark, you've paid money to go through the turnstile, and now you're going to sit there and yell, "Sell the team." Well, you just gave him reasons not to sell the team because you went through the turnstile. Don't go if you don't want to support it. Don't go because when you go through the turnstile and you pay your money there, you've just supported what you're trying to say that you don't want to support. So um, that's the only way you can really affect that is if you just don't go to the games. And you know, I still enjoy baseball. Um, if I want to go to the ballpark, I'd rather see the team here than moving somewhere else. I don't want to be a situation. I grew up an Oakland A's fan.
Mm,
Uh, you know,
mhm.
uh, Oakland doesn't have a team anymore, so that's what can happen. You'd like to see them compete a little bit better on the field, but I understand the economics of it as well. And there's no salary cap in baseball. When you've got some teams spending $300 and $400 million on their roster, and you've got other teams there are teams out there that are spending less than the Pirates this year. It's not there's no equity in baseball right now, and that's what they really need.
Well, we also know that winning solves everything as well, right?
Yep.
If they were winning, well, none of this off the field or anything else would matter at this point. And they could certainly do that if they'd build that roster a little bit more around a generational pitcher such as Paul Skeens, and that's what he is. He's a generational pitcher that they have right now that they're at least going to have for the next few years. And I think most of Pirates Nation would like to see them build a little bit around it. But I agree. Worst case scenario, Dell, is this team picks up and leaves. I mean, that would be a disaster if baseball left Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh is very passionate about their sports. They're passionate about the Steelers, as we just spent the majority of this podcast on, and they're passionate about the Penguins, and they're certainly passionate about the Pirates. Speaking of baseball, Dale, let's end with this. You're still involved with the Pony League World Series in Washington County. It's been a big part of your life and something that you're still passionate about and still involved with. The season just about getting ready to get started. And for the first time in 10 years, you and I were talking off the air. I'm not involved. My oldest going into ninth grade. He's been playing for 10 years. I've coached him every year. He has decided to forgo baseball and concentrate on football moving forward, which I'm excited about that for him, but also bummed out not to be a part of baseball this year. But I know you still are, and the Pony League World Series just continues to grow in Washington County and be a big deal.
Yeah, we have 21 teams in the Founders League this year that makes up the Washington County League, and this will be the first time this year that all those kids will be eligible to be chosen for the Washington County World Series team. Should give us an excellent opportunity to go and win the Pony World Series, which is an international event. They've the last few years they've made this at least the semifinals of that tournament. So I'm excited about this year's group. I think it's a good group, and I can't wait to start seeing these guys play. And then, we'll have I don't know 260, 270 kids in the league this year, and we got to pick 15 to represent Washington County in the Pony World Series. It's going to be a very very competitive tryout and season. So I'm excited to see how this all works out.
Well, I'm sure you'll have some Cannon Mac kids from my community on there, and at the age level they are with my son, chances are I probably coached them. So make sure they give me credit if they make that Washington County team. I'm just kidding. There's a lot of good coaches in Cannon Mac outside of me here in the last 10 years. Hey, Dale, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Enjoy your spring, enjoy the draft, and we'll get you back on here hopefully before training camp starts this summer to talk more Steelers football.
All right, sounds good. Anytime, Ed.
All right, Dell Lolley of the Steelers Audio Network and Steelers.com. And we do need to tell you one more time that oneBURGH and the TroupCast are partnering with the Ryan Shazier Fund for Spinal Rehabilitation. The Run for the Black and Gold will take place on Friday evening, May 2nd at AccuSure Stadium in the PNC Champions Club. We will be on site at that event that night from AccuSure Stadium with the red carpet, player interviews, and more. The horse race and celebrity jockey auction will feature Ryan Shazier, Jerome Bettis, Mel Blunt, Pat Fryermuth, Arthur Moats, and more. For tickets and more information, make sure you visit www.ryanshazierfund.org/run25. And join us next week for a special edition of the TroupCast with a press conference-like podcast with three of those celebrity jockeys next week right here on oneBURGH. That'll do it for the TroupCast for this week. We will see you next week right here on oneBURGH. Have a great night, everyone.